Hello there, C.Note here, and welcome to DOPEamine, the show that is like a serial killer, cold but consistent. Today on the show, I'm going to be talking to you about how to redefine your relationship to social media. And we're going to be using a metaphor related to a place that we've probably spent a lot of time in our lives, the mall. And how the mall has kids, shoppers, and sellers. And you can kind of figure out your relationship to social media through what I'm going to be talking about here in this video. What's going to help supplement this video is that I've got a couple podcast episodes that are kind of around and related to this topic. The first one being the social dilemma and accessing our shadow selves. The shadow part of ourselves is something that the social media algorithm tends to take advantage of. Not that it's some ethereal thing that's trying to harm us, but it happens to be something that the people who created these algorithms knows a lot about your personality. They know a lot more about you than you do. And it's sort of messing with your free will. And so that podcast episode talks about that a little bit and how we can start to take some of the power back for ourselves. There's also a podcast episode about introducing the idea of shadow work and how do we get started with that. And then there's a third podcast episode called The Open Sea of Truth and Opinion. And this is about understanding our relationship to things like Twitter and Facebook specifically that are more of an open ocean of people sharing their opinions, their ideas, and how we're all like ships in the ocean combating each other at about all sorts of things that are not really relevant to the things we actually deeply care about. And if we do deeply care about things, then we can create our own island with people we care about to talk about those things and create safe spaces. And I don't mean safe spaces in like the modern snowflakey quote unquote kind of way, but I mean just a space that is dedicated to something, a space that is free of attack for a while, so you can actually build your strength and develop skills and kind of incubate in a way. So that podcast also talks about that. So this episode, we're going to be talking about redefining your relationship to social media in general. And I'm typically talking about Facebook and Twitter because those are timeline-based open platforms. Instagram counts as well. And then maybe LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a little bit more of a professional platform. They don't really have the same problems that Facebook and Twitter has. So the first thing that I want to talk about as I pull out my notes and make sure that I'm on task here is let's talk about the three different types of people that show up in this mall concept. We're going to talk about the specificity of what it means to be in the mall. What the mall looks like. But let's talk about the three different types of people that are roaming a mall in general in the first place. So the first one is the kids. The kids are just teenagers. They're hanging out in the mall. They're just kind of roaming around. They're hanging out. They're skateboarding on things that they should not be skateboarding on. They're just hanging out, causing trouble, trying to steal stuff, or just like loitering with their friends, trying to figure out all the back alleyways of the mall. They're trying to see what they can break, see what they can get away with, see if they're faster than the mall cops, that sort of stuff. The kids are just spending time and hanging out, and that's really all there is to it. Sometimes the kids get in trouble. Their parents drop them off and pick them up that allow them access to the mall in the first place. And they're just trying to be kids and probably shouldn't be blamed for it. The second are the shoppers. They're the people who show up to consume. They show up to get something either specific or to roam the mall and just to gain something from the experience, whether that's entertainment, maybe meeting up with family members, having lunch at the food court, or going into different malls and window shopping, or different shops and window shopping, or just going to spend money and hanging out and not really running into the mall cops because they're spending time in a space where they're fairly civilized, quote unquote, and they understand the rules, they're abiding by the rules, and they're really taking advantage of the experience. They feel like the experience is built for them, because it is. The experience is built for shoppers. That's what a mall is for, to sell things. And that leads us to the sellers, which is the third sort of character here in this role. in these roles in the mall, the sellers are the shop owners. They're not only just the employees, which count in this metaphor, but they are people who own the stores, people who are they basically interface with the mall owner. They're making sure that they are complying to their own rules. The shoppers have rules to comply with too, and even the kids do, but the kids bend the rules a little bit more. The sellers are, trying to get their shop known by all of the shoppers, right? They want them to come to their store, spend their money in their place, and make a profit. That's just how that works. So let's talk about the mall itself. What is the mall in this social media metaphor? Actually, let me go back a second. The kids in the mall, in terms of social media, are basically like the trolls. They're the meme lords. They're the young people on the internet that are just making things and being wacky and just trying to mess with things and have fun. They're the ones that are like dive bombing Zoom meetings, quite literally. And they are they're just causing trouble wherever they can and trying to get away with things. The shoppers are the Karens of the world. And you and me, sometimes we go on the internet and we are not only just browsing in the mall by wandering the timelines that we're wandering, and occasionally met with ads. And sometimes those ads catch our attention and we buy something, or we go on Amazon and we buy something, or we specifically go searching for something that we want to buy through Google or something like that. So we can be the shoppers in that sense. And then some of us are sellers. I'm definitely a seller on the internet. I'm trying to get people to buy some of my courses. I'm trying to invite you to buy some of my courses if it's something that you need, or join me for live Q&As. There are a lot of people out there that are selling products and services all the time, and they have their own relationship to the mall as well. So that's really what I mean by these three roles, is their relationship to the mall itself, the mall being social media. So how do we define the mall itself as social media? The mall is an open space. You have free movement. You can typically go wherever you want and do whatever you want, but there are general rules, right? There are rules that are dictated by the mall itself. You can't trash the place. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't, sometimes some malls are like, hey, no running or whatever, or you can't roller skate in the mall. In terms of Twitter or Facebook, they have their own rules about codes of conduct and what helps their bottom line. And then there are some challenges with that, which we'll talk about as we get a little bit later. So those typically are, those rules are typically backed by and cannot violate the Constitution, the American Constitution. And there are similar rules for similar constitutions around the world, but the rule set of the mall is backed by the Constitution, meaning that it's to protect both the owners and the people, meaning that the mall owner can't just eject someone because they don't like them. And again, we'll get into the trickiness of that, but you can get kicked out for violating those rules by the mall cops. So the rules are written based on general civil rule sets, which are basically the Constitution. Don't be disruptive. Don't steal things. Don't cause a riot. Don't cause violence. Don't do damage. All of that stuff is a general rule that applies to this mall. And the mall cops are what can enforce the rules within the mall. And in terms of Twitter, that means, whoever the enforcers are in Twitter, the people who can ban people or kick them out. Same thing on Facebook. The moderators basically are the mall cops. And the mall cops are limited in their jurisdiction. You can, they can kick you out, but you can still go somewhere else if you want to. Or you can go back into the mall as someone else. There's really no limits to that, unless they catch your IP address and keep searching for, there's all sorts of different ways, but you can still, there's very limited ways for them to they can't physically ban you from the mall. They can't tie you up and keep you in a locked room, basically. So, you can there's certain rules for certain places, but you're able to leave and go somewhere else if you're being like harassed by someone in the mall or something like that. So if there's like the kids that are roaming, and kids get into fights all the time, if the kids are roaming the internet or roaming this mall and they get into a fight with each other, the mall cops can split them up, they can kick them out, they can do whatever they need to do. But ultimately, it's also the shopper's choice to not engage in that, or the seller's choice to not engage in that, and not get caught up in, the matters of the kids, and take a step back, or decide to go to a different mall. You can go somewhere else, or you can go to the other side of the mall and not engage with that person. That's the equivalent of basically blocking and muting someone. We have control over that sort of thing, of where we go, because it's a free, open place, right? So that freedom allows for that freedom and self-responsibility, that if you're physically in a place and someone is constantly following you, first of all, you can tell the mall cops, or if you're having an altercation with someone consistently and having trouble, then, the first course of action is just step away from that person. So the equivalent of blocking them is just going to the other side of the mall or something like that, or just ignoring them, and they're not in your peer view. So let's talk about the next section I have marked here, is that what is unique about social media versus a mall, an actual real life mall. Social media is instant and always available. It's something that we always have access to at any moment of any day. And so it's like when you put your phone to your face first thing in the morning, it's like the equivalent of everyone in the mall, the chatter, and everyone around you instantly being accessible to you. You're no longer privately in your bed. You are wandering the mall of the internet. And that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, is allowing that mall into our lives at any moment of any day. Sellers are trying to sell to you. Shoppers are talking about the experience all the time, complaining about what the sellers are doing or what the kids are doing. And then there are kids on the internet saying all sorts of things that are causing problems or trying to start fights or whatever. Like, once you put the phone to your face, you are stepping out of your bedroom and into the mall. And I think that would suck if that actually happened. If you stepped out of bed and suddenly you're in a crowded mall, and having to make that split-second adjustment between being a person who is just pleasantly asleep and calm, and then suddenly you're in a mall and everything's busy and so people are trying to sell things to you, and people are complaining about things and yelling at each other and all sorts of stuff, right? You can see how that gets out of hand really quickly. And the algorithm itself provides a different kind of experience of shopping and interacting. It's more dynamic and not fully in your control. So with like a physical mall these days, it's like you can wander the mall and you can go towards the store you want to go towards, or interact with the people you want to interact with, or go to the store, the restaurant in the food court that you want to go to. Nowadays, it's like you're on a treadmill in the mall, and anything that the mall thinks you like is thrown into your face. Like, hey, do you want some fast food? Do you want some clothes? Do you want some learning? Like, buy this, please. Or like, someone complaining like, hey, this is not great, don't go here. Or like, this person is an evil oligarch. Or like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the world. Or like, I love this thing, you should love it too. It's like all up in your face. And, everything's just kind of thrown at you. And it's kind of like Minority Report, when you walk in and suddenly everything's personalized, and they can give you all of those little bits and pieces. And I'm not trying to demonize the internet. That's the algorithm is a powerful thing. I have it, the algorithm, in capital letters, because it's kind of an entity, if you can think about it that way. I'm not treating it that way. I'm kidding when I say that. But the idea here is that the algorithm and the internet as an experience is different than physically being in a mall, and understanding if that was affecting you physically in person, you will have a much more adverse effect to it. So the challenge we have is that the social media is, as much as we can physically see it on the screen, it is a mental construct. So I'm trying to give you this mall metaphor to give something physical to this mental construct, to make that connection between the real world and this sort of intuitive mental construct. And a lot of people aren't handling that mental construct very well because there is no equivalent, or there's no easy equivalent to the real world. And that's why I'm providing this metaphor. So what's missing? Mall cops and owners have too much power. And that's one of the challenges we're facing in the modern world with balancing it out, right? So I mentioned the Constitution, I mentioned writing rules and all of that stuff. You know, Twitter and Facebook, they are basically enforcing things however they want to. Facebook banned my website for a reason. They just said it was abusive. Somebody reported my website as abusive. I don't know what I said or why or what that person's thoughts were, or if there's something I can correct or mend. I've tried reporting it to Facebook to get it fixed, and I've gotten nothing. I've got terrible customer service. I've gotten no a way to get my website back. And if I, as a person, as a consumer, as a seller, as a shopper, was protected properly by the Constitution, behind, backing me as a human being before the platform, that I would have the opportunity to do something about it, or more readily do something about it, or there would be pressure on Facebook to make it accessible to do something about it and properly fix it. But as it stands, basically Facebook is able to make its own moral judgments. Twitter is also able to make its own moral judgments because it's not affected by the Constitution as much as it probably should be. And that's one of the debates that are kind of happening right now around, something like the president being banned from Twitter. And there are, the basis of the First Amendment, all of that stuff. And I don't want you to get distracted by that. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. But the main idea is that is to kind of be careful when you're engaging on social media. You can assume that you have all of the same rights that you have as a person, wandering the street or in an actual physical mall. But Twitter and Facebook could kick you out for reasons that are not typical to an actual physical mall. The ideas of freedom of speech or other amendments to the Constitution or other aspects of the Constitution don't always apply in a clean way just yet. And that stuff's still being worked on. And I imagine we will get there. That's sort of a failing of 4Blue in terms of spiral dynamics. That's a failing of government to really catch up. But I suspect it'll get there. But what I'm saying is that is to be careful. If you're trying to be a seller online, if you're trying to be, if you're being a shopper, assuming that people can or will protect you, it's more your personal responsibility than it is some other being or thing, right? It's not the government. It's not Twitter or Facebook themselves. It's not easy to completely trust that everything's got your back. And I know this sounds super cynical, but it really ties into personal empowerment, and it ties into the idea that you are responsible for your experience, that you have to block people or mute people that are affecting your mental health and affecting your fixation and keeping you coming back to the mall when you're just wasting time and not being an effective or finding a sense of peace as a human being, right? So that's why I reference this as a mall, because the mall itself, being able to see that when you go on the internet, you're actually going somewhere. You're not just in your room and on your phone. It's like your mind is being transported into this grand mall throughout the world. So with that, I want to give a few words of caution that hanging out in the mall can be a waste of time if you're not doing it intentionally. So if you're just being a kid that's hanging out in the mall and you've got the time to do that, fine, have fun, do that. I did that in the early to late 2000s. I spent a lot of time on Newgrounds. I can't even remember a lot of the websites that were out there. eBaum's World, those are like that's like the equivalent of the internet arcade, right? Just hanging out in the arcade and having fun. Chat rooms were like that back in the day, although that was full of predators. There are modern versions of that. Like TikTok is kind of it's somewhat the modern arcade. Like you're just kind of hanging out and playing, though there's conspiracies and all sorts of other dangerous stuff there too. None of it is safe on its own just yet. But the idea is that if you're doing it intentionally, especially using this metaphor, can allow you to do it intentionally as opposed to just doing it mindlessly, right? So that really helps you to say, like, I don't really want to be in this crowd of people. I don't really want to be spending my time fixated on arguing with people or being surrounded by all this noise. So, you're going to be interacting with all sorts of people. And I mentioned like kind of the treadmill and how like the algorithm is feeding you stuff, but the algorithm is also feeding you people that are going to challenge your worldview. There are people showing up that you would probably never normally hang out with, or you would hang out with them but not know certain things about them. There are people that I grew up with, and a lot of us have probably experienced this, people that I grew up with that I had no idea about their political views. I had no care in the world about certain things, religious ideologies or other ideologies. I had no idea about any of that stuff. And then suddenly, the internet made me aware, and that made me judge them in a different way. And I didn't think that was fair. That was not something I wanted to know about my friends. I didn't care. That's not what I looked for in friendship. And now people are building bonds with people based on that, based on ideologies, which is dangerous in the long run. It's like cult behavior. But that's the challenge right now. That's the reality of the challenge right now, is that you're going to face things that are uncomfortable. You're going to face things that challenge your worldview. And that in itself is a process of learning how to interact with people in a way that is a little bit more adult and is about responding, not just reacting. But it does suck that it's thrown at you. And again, that's a personal empowerment thing. That's your personal decision to say like, okay, I don't really know this person. I don't need that energy in my life. I don't need that around. And that can go in either, that's not about protecting your ideology. That's about protecting your mental health. So for me, after some recent events, I try to take as much of a neutral stance on something as I can. And when you're constantly inundated with people's intentional hatred, one way or the other, this is a bipartisan thing. It's not unique to any particular ideology. When people are being hateful and hurtful and just screaming in the mall, you want them to get kicked out, right? But there's nothing doing that right now, unless it's at a mass scale and inciting something that clearly violates the First Amendment. But still, the mall cops are the ones making the choices. And the mall cops are not reliable. So you have to make the choice that this is not a place I want to be, or this is not a group that I want to hang out with, or this is not the part of the mall that I want to go into. Again, that's your personal responsibility. So you don't have government protection, right? Right now, we don't have in the mall cops don't know how to talk to the city police, basically. That's basically the equivalent of what's happening right now. So when something happens, when you're reporting something, you're reporting it to a mall cop, and the mall cop is like, they're going to make more subjective choices than a city cop might, which would make more subjective choices than like a state cop would, than a federal cop would. You would think, at least. But they're getting closer to the Constitution is what I'm saying. And as you get closer, you're going to be able to get more support as a person. But right now, that's just not the case at all. So That's really the point, is that because of that, I'm not debating whether or not that's true or the nuances of that. I don't care. The idea is that if you are engaging in this place, that it's basically a space that you have to manage your involvement with it yourself. And I'm riding that point home. So how do we start to improve our relationship to social media through this metaphor? So like I said, you can start blocking and muting people as they start to affect your mental health. If there are things that are keeping you coming back to social media and you're feeling like addicted to it and it's invading your life, that may be because you're allowing people into your sphere that you would not normally allow into your life in person. It's like some random stranger showing up in your house and starting to debate you about things that you're opposed to, or things that are angry and unconscious and persistent and prevalent, and just being thrown in your face when you're trying to get a moment of peace. You are in charge of your peace. And, it's also a way to think about how you manage your time. Do you need to get to work right now, or do you need to go to the mall? If you need to go to the mall, then be at the mall. If you need to be at work, then be at work. Put your phone aside, put it down, put it on the charger, put it somewhere else, turn it on silent, whatever it is. Like, you don't need to, think of even if you're in the mall and you're listening to music, and streaming music is like being in an internet cafe in the mall, right? Like, that's fine. Or you're doing a chat with people you work with online. Like, those are more dedicated, intentional, focused uses of the internet. But if you're just streaming, you're scrolling, especially doom scrolling the timeline on Twitter and Facebook, then you're just sitting in the mall, people watching, and pointing out how people are jerks, or fighting with anyone that walks by. Like, it's like sitting on a bench in the mall and someone walks by and you're like, "Hey, nice shirt, buddy." And just kind of like messing with them. Like, is that a good use of your time? Right? So, only go intentionally when you need something, when you need to do something, when you need to engage with something, you need to learn something. That's the hard part about the internet, is that it's such a mental concept, and you can mode switch so quickly. You can go to a bookstore, to the food court, to the arcade, to the cafe, all in mere moments, and come across any random number of people or any ideology or any concept, and overhear people talking out loud, and people interrupting your conversations and you're interrupting their conversations. And it's a chaotic mess. And the reason it's a chaotic mess is because there's no delineated lines. There's no way conceptually for the person to know what they're actually experiencing in reality. So this mall concept is a way for you to conceptualize the little details of what it is that you're actually doing on the internet, right? So we don't have skeuomorphism anymore as a design concept. And that used to be the separation point, right? Like iBooks and Apple Music and all of those things used to look more like those physical spaces. Now it's more conceptual, esoteric, and we have to remind ourselves what those spaces actually represent and how we can better use those spaces and block people or protect ourselves from conversations or people that we find are not good for our mental health, keeping us from being productive, keeping us from a sense of peace and living the best life that we can. So that's really it. So as I'm approaching the 30-minute mark and my camera's going to die, so I appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching these videos. If you love this video, please like and subscribe. I mean, even if you just like this video, that would be cool. Hit the bell icon to get notified when these videos go live, because there's somewhat of a consistent schedule, but it's not always the same time. So you never know when something sparks interest and will show up in your inbox. And then also, we're starting to do live Q&As towards the middle of the month. I just did one last week. The next one is going to be February 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So join us there for that. And there will be some special announcements coming during that. So bookmark it, set a reminder, join us when that comes. And DOPEamine.life if you want to check out other articles, podcasts, our premium programs. And if you sign up for our email list, you as an INTP will get a free ebook, but then you can also join our Mighty Networks private group through that email list. So go ahead and do that if that's something you are interested in. So, and when I say interested in, someone who is serious about personal growth and wanting to connect with other INTPs and gain some additional insights from me. So let me know what you think of this concept. Do you resonate with the mall concept? Does another idea come to mind? Is there, does this reshape or help you rethink about how you approach the internet? I would love to know in the comments below. Let me know your questions, and that's it. So I'll take care of yourselves and each other, and I'll catch you next time on DOPEamine. See ya.